This is the 2022 Uber data breach presentation by Brianna Beekman and Olawafemi Fedego. This is the Uber's 2022 data breach stands out as one of the most significant corporate cyber incidences in recent years. The attack was carried out by an 18-year-old hacker who successfully exploited social engineering and MFA fatigue to break through Uber's defenses. At the center of this crisis was Uber's CISO and security leadership team. Weak oversight and poor credential management made the breach possible, and leadership failed to act on warning signs. These warning signs weren't new. Uber had already concealed a major breach in 2016, struggled with hard-coded passwords, and neglected consistent employee training. Once inside the network, the hacker gained access to critical systems including AWS, Google Workspace, Slack, and several internal tools. Contractor vulnerabilities and the lack of a strong incident response plan made the damage even worse. Overall, this breach exposed deep flaws in human factors, security protocols, and organizational leadership. It highlighted the urgent need for zero-trust security frameworks, stronger employee training, and a cultural shift in how cybersecurity is prioritized. These are the questions this project will answer regarding the description of the case. 1. Who is the decision maker of the case? 2. What is the decision to be made? 3. What are the decision maker's objectives? 4. Are there other important actors? What are their objectives? And lastly, what is the environment in which the decision is to be reached? For the first question, who is the decision maker? In this case, the key decision makers were Uber's Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, along with the broader security leadership team. They were responsible for managing the immediate response to the breach, deciding how to contain the attack, and determining what long-term measures were necessary to strengthen Uber's defenses. Their role was central because these decisions they made would directly affect not only the company's technical recovery, but also its reputation and compliance with regulators. For the second question, what is the decision to be made? The decision to be made in this case had two critical parts. First, Uber Security's leadership needed to determine how to quickly contain the 2022 breach and secure the systems that had already been compromised. This meant stopping the attackers' access and preventing further damage. Second, they had to make longer-term decisions about how to strengthen Uber's overall cybersecurity defenses to prevent future incidences. That included moving beyond quick fixes and investing in stronger protocols, such as zero trust frameworks and improved privileged access management to build long-term resilience. For the third question, what are the decision makers' objectives? The decision makers in this case had three main objectives. First, they needed to protect Uber's most sensitive assets, including AWS, Google Workspace, and the company's privileged access management systems, which were directly exposed during the attack. Second, their goal was to restore the overall integrity of the network and ensure that stolen or compromised data was secured against further misuse. Finally, beyond the technical issues, Uber's leadership also had to focus on rebuilding public trust and maintaining regulatory compliance, especially given the company's history with concealed breaches and ongoing scrutiny from regulators. Next, are there other important actors? What are their objectives? Yes, there were several other important actors in this case, each with very different objectives. The hacker connected to the Lapsus group aimed to exploit Uber's weak credentials and expose the company's internal systems, demonstrating just how vulnerable the organization was at the time. The employee or contractor whose account was compromised became a target of social engineering. They were manipulated through multi-factor authentication fatigue, which gave the attacker the entry point into Uber systems. Finally, external stakeholders such as regulators and the public played a major role. Their objective was accountability and transparency. After Uber's history with concealed breaches, there was a significant pressure to ensure this incident was handled openly and responsibly. Lastly, what is the environment in which the decision is to be reached? The environment in which Uber's leadership had to make decisions was already extremely challenging. First, Uber's reputation had been badly damaged by the concealed 2016 breach, which raised serious doubts about the company's transparency and trustworthiness. Second, legal and regulatory pressures were already very high. Regulators and the public were watching closely to see how Uber would handle yet another major security failure. Third, Uber's reliance on contractors and vendors expanded its vulnerabilities, creating more entry points that could be exploited by hackers. And finally, the company's weak incident response planning showed containment of the breach, making recovery even more difficult. Regarding the analysis of the issue, in analyzing the Uber breach, several key issues stood out. First, Uber's credential management was weak, with hard-coded passwords creating single points of failure that attackers could exploit. Second, human error and a lack of proper training made employees vulnerable to MFA, fatigue attacks, and social engineering tactics, which is exactly how the hacker got in. And third, gaps in Uber's privileged access management allowed the attacker to move laterally across systems once inside, escalating the impact of the breach. From there, Uber's leadership faced two main alternatives. The first was to apply narrow fixes, such as tighter monitoring and stricter access controls. This would be quick and less disruptive, but it risks leaving deeper cultural and structural issues unresolved. The second option was a comprehensive overhaul, implementing zero trust security, phishing-resistant MFA, stronger network segmentation, and employee training programs. While more resource intensive, this approach would provide long-term resilience and align Uber's practices with standards like NISP SP 853, Sharma and Kalikar 2014 citation. Finally, the consequences of these choices were significant. A narrow response might stabilize things in the short term, but would leave Uber open to repeat breaches and continued reputational harm. By contrast, a holistic response would require more investment and organizational change, but it would ultimately strengthen security, compliance, and the public trust.
It is regrettable to note that Uber's security breach was successful due to the access gained through a compromised contractor account, exploiting multi-factor authentication fatigue and leveraging social engineering tactics to infiltrate Uber's internal systems, including the AWS, Google Workspace, Slack, and Uber's privileged access management platform. Analyzing the positives in leadership response, it is important to note that within 24 hours of the breach, the CISO team publicly acknowledged the attack. This demonstrates transparency on its part. They also engaged law enforcement and third-party cybersecurity experts. Internal systems that had been affected were also taken offline and disabled. Credentials were rotated and monitoring was enhanced. Despite the leadership's transparency and the competence shown in breach response, the attack revealed an underlying security posture which showed that the company lacked proactive threat modeling and was also weak on employee training. It was also clear that secure coding practices were violated, considering that admin credentials were hard-coded in PowerShell scripts. The attacker's ability to make lateral movements also revealed insufficient network segmentation and poor access governance. The leadership's security posture was largely reactive. It was not proactive. It did not act to limit threat modeling and employee training against social engineering, revealing a gap in organizational resilience and cyber risk governance. The 2022 Uber breach can be analyzed through several organizational and leadership theories, offering a multidimensional understanding of the failure and its implications. Ronald Krauss's 1937 theory on the nature of the firm provides a foundational lens for examining Uber's reliance on external contractors. Quast argues that firms internalize operations to reduce transaction costs associated with market exchanges. Considering that Uber's breach was facilitated through a compromised contractor account, it is believed that Uber's outsourcing of sensitive functions may have inadvertently increased the system's risk exposure. This supports the argument for internalizing critical cybersecurity rules to enhance control and reduce vulnerability. Another relevant theory will be the ethical leadership theory, as articulated by Trevino, Hartman, and Brown, 2000. The authors distinguished between the moral person and the moral manager. The theory described the moral person as embodying integrity and ethical behavior, while the moral manager actively promotes ethical standards through communication and enforcement. Uber's leadership appeared deficient in both dimensions, as it failed to model secure behavior or cultivate a culture of cyber vigilance. The theory underscores the importance of ethical leadership in shaping organizational norms and responses to digital threats. John Coater's 1990 distinction between managers and leaders also illuminates Uber's reactive posture. Managers focus on control and short-term problem solving, while leaders inspire vision and drive transformational change. In the case of the Uber 2022 attack, the company's response to the breach was largely managerial, focused on containment rather than being visionary. A leadership approach grounded in proactive strategy and cultural transformation could have fostered greater resilience. In conclusion, it is clear that the Uber 2022 data breach was not merely a lapse in technical safeguards, but also a systemic failure rooted in organizational design, leadership structure, and cultural oversight. The incident exposed vulnerabilities in access governance, credential hygiene, and human-centered defenses, all of which were exacerbated by reactive security posture and insufficient executive accountability. By applying foundational theories from Coast's insights on firm boundaries to Trevino's ethical leadership model and Coater's distinction between management and leadership, we see that resilience in cybersecurity demands More than firewalls and protocols, leadership does play a very important role. It requires moral clarity, strategic foresight, and a culture of vigilance led from the top. The path forward is distinct. Uber and similar organizations have to embed zero trust principles, codify breach response playbooks, invest in behavioral defense training, and rigorously audit privileged access. When cybersecurity is treated as a strategic, ethical, and cultural priority, organizations move beyond damage control and towards durable resilience in an increasingly hostile digital landscape. There are some recommendations to mitigate the recurrence of the Uber 2022 style hacking. These recommendations must address institutional and behavioral lapses while also enhancing resilient systems. A primary step is the adoption of the zero trust architecture, which assumes no implicit trust within the network. All access requests, internal or external, must be continuously verified based on identity, device health, location, and behavior. It is important to implement micro-segmentation to isolate sensitive systems, enforce least privilege access policies across all roles, and use identity-aware proxies and continuous authentication mechanisms. This approach aligns with NIST 800 to 207 framework and is increasingly recognized as a gold standard in breach prevention. Secondly, though the Uber breach response was swift, it was largely ad hoc. Without a codified break playbook, cross-functional coordination, especially with legal and public relations team, can falter under pressure. It is important to develop and institutionalize communication protocols and create breach response playbooks that outline roles and escalation paths. Codified playbooks reduce ambiguity and ensure a unified, lawful, and reputational sound response in every occasion. Company may include legal counsel, PR, HR, and technical leads in tabletop exercises and may define thresholds for public disclosure and law enforcement engagement, while also maintaining pre-approved messaging templates for internal and external stakeholders. Thirdly, implementing continuous training programs that address social engineering, phishing, and MFA fatigue will protect the system, considering that MFA fatigue is a psychological vulnerability where users approve repeated authentication requests out of frustration or confusion. It reflects a broader need for behavioral defense. This can be implemented by building a human firewall to complement technical defense and would involve conducting quarterly phishing simulations with tailored feedback, using behavioral nudges and gamified learning to reinforce secure habits, as well as training employees to recognize and report suspicious activity, especially in remote work contexts. The attacker will recall accessed admin credentials stored in plain text scripts, a critical lapse in credential hygiene, and privileged access management. This reveals that Uber must conduct regular audits of all privileged accounts and developer environments. It is important to use automated tools to detect hardcore secrets and expose credentials, rotate admin credentials frequently, and store them in encrypted vaults. It is also imperative to monitor logs for anomalies and enforce just-in-time access provisioning. Lastly, Uber must reassess its reliance on external contractors for sensitive operations, considering that the breach exploited a contractor's compromised system.
This slide shows all of the references used in this project and paper. Thank you for taking time to watch and listen to this presentation. Again, this is by Brianna Beekman and Olawafemi Badevo for Professor Tran for the JLA 555 Cybersecurity of the Homeland final presentation. Thank you for taking